to engage with you about some of the big issues in children's social work practice, because you'll notice that the role is perhaps not the conventional way that isn't designed in the conventional way that heads of quality assurance are. This very much combines the role of principal social worker because we're very interested in developing even further the Camden model of social work and the head of quality assurance, a role which isn't just in an abstract way looking at, for example, performance, but really hearing what the experience of families and crucially of children is of our practice, and thinking about how in a partnership context that's delivered. We're really looking for somebody who is obviously has the right kind of professional experience, but also has professional curiosity. You'll have, I believe, have had a look at our latest inspection. It'd be very surprising if people applying for this role haven't. And you'll know that there were two things. One, under the SIF inspection framework, we were found to be overall good, but with outstanding, particularly for some of the strength of our partnership work and in leadership, management and governance. But also that we were a place which thought deeply about how to create the right circumstances for excellent practice to thrive, to take that practice forward and to create an environment where social workers feel empowered and enabled to practice their profession. So we're really excited actually to be using the webinar as a way of engaging with people who think that they might have what it takes, but also have something that they can bring to that debate. You'll be aware that Camden is a partner in practice, that we are an improvement partner for another authority, that we are an innovation site, and therefore the practice that we're developing here is very much set in a wider national context. And therefore the role isn't simply about making sure that the things we're doing now are happening and are happening well, but really engaging with social workers in Camden, with our partners, and with a national community of practice in developing the next phase of the Camden model of social work. Of course, it's really important that that is set in a wider corporate context, and Camden as a council is absolutely committed to being a place where excellent social work practice can flourish, but that's set in an overall strategy which is orientated towards prevention and early intervention, where investment is made at the right point in the system. And so we're also looking for somebody who is able to bring that experience and professional sensibility to the wider task of leading and offering leadership in the council. So that's a really important part of it. We have very strong partnerships, and particularly the Safeguarding Children Board, which Ofsted judged to be outstanding. And even with the changes that are afoot in terms of making local safeguarding arrangements, we think the strength of that partnership, the commitment of partners to the safety of children, and seeing the value of social work as part of a multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach to making sure that all of Camden's children have the best start in life, are protected from harm and can thrive, is really important. So it'll be in that partnership context that we would also expect you to be able to develop a narrative which is about not just how things are now, but how we think they will develop in the future. It's a really exciting role, but you've probably heard more than enough from me. And so I'm going to pass on to Anne Turner, who is Director of Children's Safeguarding and Social Work, who will talk more specifically about the role and about social work in Camden. Thank you for your interest, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Hello. As Martin said, I'm Anne Turner and I'm the Director of Children's Social Work and Safeguarding in Camden. And I am what is called the lead professional. So I'm the person who is responsible for the quality and delivery of social work to all our residents. And so for me, this quality assurance job is really important to work with myself and be very much part of our management team in our social work service, so that we can make sure that we respond to all our community and keep our children safe. We've played a very important role in the Council in developing our relationship-based social work practice as a model of excellent practice. And people across the Council are now adopting many of these methods in the way they are working. Our early help services are all based on relationship-based social work, and we're lucky enough to be in the same department as adult social care, who are also in the world of adults and most particularly mental health, substance misuse services, using similar models to ourselves, which means we can work in a much more effective way with families. And that means that we can reward our staff as well with really good training and development in partnership with the Tavistock, and colleagues later will go into more detail about that. It is very important that quality assurance, head quality assurance, is within the centre of our department and is about helping things improve for our children and supporting our social work staff solve problems in a very difficult climate. It is important that we also have a head of quality assurance who can bring new ideas to practice and also check that we're compliant with the legal requirements of our services. But we're very much a service that base ourselves on outcomes for children, and the processes and procedures are ones that support that process rather than being a thing in themselves. So good interpersonal skills, good problem solving skills, and good skills at working with a very powerful partnership. We are lucky enough to have some of the national organisations based in Camden, so we have some very, very skilled partners working with us. So the head of quality assurance needs to have an appetite to work with people who've got a lot to contribute, and we would hope to benefit from that. The principal social work role we have developed here in a very positive way. It is about putting professional social work at the heart of what we do. It is also about bringing practice from what the frontline staff are telling us through the whole organisation, so that Martin and myself can feel that we really know what's happening. We're co-located with our social work teams on the 9th floor in 5PS, which is our central office. We also have our looked after children's service based in Crowndale Centre in the middle of Camden Town. And Martin and I, along with the heads of service, spend a lot of time going to the offices, talking to frontline staff and watching how our services operate. Any head of service for quality assurance will need to be part of that culture and be very much joining us in being positive with our staff and being engaged in work. There is a really strong role to carry out with, as Martin's already mentioned, particularly being a partner in practice. We're now working with other authorities to help them with their performance, and the head of quality assurance and the principal social worker role will be important, doing that work jointly with us so that we can take part in national conversations and be part of debate that will inform practice and also help with all the challenges ahead of financial limits and the changes we're going to have to make to meet the demands of new legislation. Performance is important, auditing is important, and compliance is important. So although I've said those things and not necessarily what we talk about all the time, this role will be an important lead both in the council, completing audits within the social work service, but it will also be an important role in ensuring that we carry out multi-agency audits. And we've got changes ahead, as you all know, around safeguarding boards, how they're going to be organised into the future. So this post will be helping that conversation so that we can develop a new and more effective approach to our safeguarding board to keep the strengths of our partnership in place, but also make sure that we have got in place, meeting the national legislative requirements. So to perhaps now go down further and to describe exactly what the Quality Assurance Unit does, and it is actually quite a wide range of activities. I'd like to introduce now Kurt Ferdinand, who's our manager of the IRO service, and he's going to tell you in detail about the different roles that the teams within QA undertake.
Yes. Hello, and my name is Kurt Ferdinand, and I'm the manager of the Independent Reviewing Service for Looked After Children. However, I also hold the Independent Reviewing Officers for Child Protection as well. So that's my current role at the moment. I work within the Quality Assurance Unit, and Jenny Spencer is our Service Development Manager, and she's unable to be here today. But she has the control over a second part of the actual unit, which basically deals with governance and development, training and support networks for the Framework I Mosaic system that we use in Camden. As the manager of the IRO service, I pay very close attention to the outcomes for looked after children in particular, and I pay close attention to their overall development and well-being. So within that, we play a key role in making sure that the social workers are working to a high standard in terms of performance and making sure that the outcomes for those children in our care is as best as it can possibly be into the future. We pay close attention to child protection needs, and we bring forward a lot of themes within Camden, and the IROs are very close to the ground in terms of directly working with social workers. So we pay close attention to issues around child protection involving child sexual exploitation, gang affiliations and antisocial behaviour, trafficking, and also children who are missing. We also make sure that we work closely with our partner agencies, and we pass on some of that information to the heads of services across the department to make sure that these themes are being put forward and presented in their formal arenas, such as strategy meetings and case conferences. I actually continue to hold a number of cases myself in terms of being a reviewing officer, and that keeps me close to the ground in terms of what's happening as well, because we have a number of children who are from unaccompanied minors that we have in the system, and there are a lot of demands on the network and the system in terms of how we manage ourselves financially. We have a care pathways provision where we look at cases in terms of making sure that they're meeting the thresholds in terms of coming into the care system or making them move forward into PLO and into the public arena. We also do some work around development of social work staff in terms of training. We have a very good training facility in Camden, and we like to branch that out. We're quite creative in terms of exploring different training opportunities for social workers and developing their professional practice. I also do some work around pathway placements as well. Camden is quite good in terms of the provision that we have pathways to independent accommodation as well. And we work closely with those agencies in terms of making sure that we're working closely with those young people and the agencies in terms of developing their independent skills going on into the future. We have a very good network of support in terms of training. We have a social work professional training worker who makes sure that all the social workers are up to speed with what's happening in terms of legislation and new training. And again, we use that in terms of moving it forward for social workers in terms of improving their development and their practice. We also do some work with, around systemic work, and that will be discussed with you in just a moment with some of the other social workers as well. I think that's as much as I can say for now, but I'm sure you'll have some questions in the future. But I would just like to say that we have a very experienced network within the team. Many of the managers who are here in terms of social work and the IROs and in the team managers been in Camden for a significant period of time. So we have a very good understanding in terms of how things work in Camden and who to negotiate with in terms of raising alerts or if we have any concerns about drag or delay in terms of practice. And I think that's something which is a really good provision for anyone who did come forward to take this post in terms of being a very key support network for you, in terms of supporting you as you develop and settle into Camden. So I'd like to pass you on to James Owen and to Sarah Brown now, who will give you some further discussions about their role as an IRO and also talking about some of the systemic work that we do within Camden.
Hi. I'm James Owen, and I'm one of the independent reviewing officers in Camden.
And I'm Sarah Brown. I'm an IRO with the Children in Need lead.
And we're both independent reviewing officers. I specialise in working with looked after children, and as Sarah said, she specialises in the Child in Need service. But we also have sort of a dual aspect to our roles, and we are the systemic champions. We call ourselves, which is a rather grand title, but we chair a group of social workers, managers, senior practitioners, who are all very invested in our systemic way of working. I suppose we just talk about that briefly. First of all, we had our systemic training sort of began in about 2015, and with the development of the Camden model of social work at that time, and we didn't want to let that training drop off the agenda, I suppose.
Yeah, I think people recognised that we needed to keep the momentum going. That people were really passionate about this way of working, that the children and families worked, kind of appreciated that style of social work, but actually maybe there needed to be more challenge in terms of senior management about how they could kind of demonstrate those ways of working to the social workers. So I think we've been meeting kind of on a regular basis and made a lot of progress in terms of coming up with a charter and pledge for children to really sort of evidence what it is that we do differently from other boroughs. And actually, does it make a difference to the outcomes of children and families? And that's what we're being sort of curious about. So I guess as a sort of the lead sort of social worker, it would be your role in thinking about how you would work with the systemic champions and taking back those kind of conversations and those challenges back to senior management, to keep that sort of dialogue between the social workers on the ground and then senior management, to ensure that Camden's model of social work is kind of happening through the different stratas of management.
Yeah, and that you know, these principles that we want to adhere to, these systemic principles, are permeated sort of across the organisation. And as Anne said, and as Sarah said, the principal social worker role is key to the work of the Champions Group, because that principal social could act as that link between us and the management team. And I think some of the best feedback we've had for the success of the Champions Group is that it's been a way for social workers to feel heard, social workers to feel that they did have a voice in putting those messages through as to any sort of barriers or obstacles in our ways of working. And I think when hearing Martin speak about the vision Camden has about it being about early help and it being about putting the resources where the families need it and where they want it, we feel as a Systemic Champions Group that we're getting to a point where the organisation is working in a similar way. So, our culture is of openness and of challenge across the hierarchy. So, if we can create that culture in our organisation, then the social workers can feel as comfortable and as confident to go out and have those open and honest conversations with the families they work with, I suppose.
Because I guess it's about being curious, like Martin said, about thinking about I think, this quality assurance unit works very well. I think there's lots of good aspects, and it's thinking about what we can do even better. So I think, as Kurt said, I think we've got a really strong team identity and a lot of experience within the group. So I guess it would be your opportunity to sort of acknowledge and recognise those strengths, and then thinking about what would be the next step to improve on even that. And I guess in my role as Children in Need lead, it's thinking about consistency across the service, so to ensure as much as possible that every children and family get the same kind of service, whichever social work team that they come across, and that you're going to be stepping down at the right times, that you're going to be giving kind of respect and trust to a family when you need to, and then escalating at the same time when risks do become too much and that child protection needs to be thought about. So my role is really to think about consistency across the service so that seniors and team managers have an idea and our partner agencies understand, and a network can hold that anxiety about stepping out of a family's life, and being involved with a very kind of clear plan and the reasons to do that.
And I suppose what I've moved over to be part of the quality assurance unit about a year ago, and before that I was in sort of the looked after children sort of management structure, and what I've really appreciated about the quality assurance unit, and what I suppose I really enjoy about working in Camden and specifically within quality assurance, is that there is the focus on developing the process, developing the procedures to give social workers the tools and the security to do their job, but there's also that we're always trying to develop that language as to how you do that, how you then elegantly manage to develop the skills of the social workers and promote the right sort of values in that social work phase, and that promoting that, you know, the strength and the desire to build positive relationships with families and bring that into the work. There's sort of two prongs to the work of the quality assurance unit, and I think what's really great about what we do in Camden is the way that we bring the young people's and the parents' voices into that work as well, and into our sort of planning, because we have a children care council, we have a participation worker that works within the quality assurance unit that, you know, is constantly trying to bring those young people's views and wishes into what we're doing, and then through our family group conference service, again, we have, you know, a group of parents who are able to provide feedback on what we're doing and to help us think on a daily basis as to what we're doing and you know, how well we're working, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's probably.
And now we're going to pass over to some of the child protection officers. That's Jane and Helen.
Hello, my name is Helen Stack and I'm one of the independent reviewing officers, and in May I chair child protection conferences.
And hi, my name is Jane Stabrava and I do the same role as Helen.
I think a lot has been said already by our colleagues about our role. I suppose just to add on to what James and Sarah were saying about sort of I suppose the efforts and the importance of getting the family's views across, and in particular the children's views. I think we're still sort of working to look at how and where children can actually be included in part of the conference process. We have consultation forms, but I think it's really important that we hear their voice. And I think also sort of in encouraging families to participate fully. And I think with the signs of safety model that we have, I think we all feel there has been some improvement in that, and that parents are generally of the view that it is more inclusive and that they feel maybe more able to participate. But again, it's something to continually to work upon and to get feedback from them.
Yeah, and I totally endorse that. And in terms of having children actually attending conferences, that has definitely increased in the past year. And I actually had, just to give you a sort of an idea, I had 3 children turn up to a conference, which was absolutely amazing. However, all 3 children didn't come into the conference. I saw all 3 of them together, and then the eldest came in and represented the views of all of the siblings. And it was a very dynamic conference. There were some challenges within the conference in terms of appropriateness of certain information being shared, but it was all handled really, really well, especially by the parents, and the network were very encouraging and supporting the children within the conference forum. But I think, we can all think about different ways of ensuring that the voices of the children and the parents are at the centre of child protection conferences. It is about their lives. It is the reality that they are living in. And it can be quite daunting for children to walk into a conference forum where there are so many people in the room. But when it happens, it is usually a very good experience, certainly for the social work team, but for all the network to actually be able to speak with the children about what's really going on in their lives for them. Okay.
I think to just say about our role, which I think has probably been referred to earlier, is just about the close linking with the social work teams, and that we each have a link with the teams, so that we'll look at sort of particular issues, practice standards. But I think it's a two-way process, that we're receptive to what social workers are saying about their experiences and some of the difficulties and challenges, but also to offering sort of advice and having that quality assurance role as well. And we also do the LADO role on a rota basis. So maybe that's just another thing to add in terms of our role.
Okay, so that was quite a lot to take in, I guess, in one go. It's quite an odd experience doing a webinar where you're sending and not receiving people's cues. Though we have started to get some really interesting questions in, and I'd like to encourage you now to use the question box to bring forward any questions about the model of practice, about our kind of intent, about the role. Though of course there'll be other opportunities in the recruitment process for you to ask more detailed questions. But it's really just in the kind of the spirit of the webinar, really, to think about some of those issues, either about how well the model is embedded, the strength of the partnerships, the type of work that is envisaged in the unit. But also you may have more general questions about the nature, role of social work and the direction of travel, which we might have interesting views about, and if not, the questions will stimulate us to think about that, because I think you will have heard from a number of colleagues that curiosity is really at the heart of the practice model. So let's have a look at some of the questions that are coming in. I've got a couple, and what I'm going to do is I'll read them out so you can hear the questions, and I may say a few bits, but then I might ask others to chip in. You might not see them, you might only hear them, or you might see them appear over my shoulder, but that's the kind of nature of the technology. So the first question was, what challenges or opportunities have the revised Ofsted framework, the ILACs, and joint targeted methodologies presented for Camden? And I think it's fair to say, first of all, that we were one of the very last authorities to be inspected under the single inspection framework. So in a way, we are hoping, I think, that that we won't be subject to ILACs very quickly, but we have already had a focused visit. From our point of view, actually, inspection is important, but it's something which, and it would be ridiculous not to understand the inspection and accountability framework. But we really focus on getting the practice right, making sure that we're operating at the standards that we expect to see, and that's recorded in a way which inspectors can recognise when they see it. But passing the Ofsted inspection framework isn't an objective in itself. It's a byproduct of having a really clear understanding of how you orientate the child protection and looked after systems towards change for children and improving their life chances. We do watch very interestingly, looking at the emerging themes. We have a developing sector-led improvement model in London, where the self-evaluations that are used in the Ofsted discussions are also form the core of our self-assessment for that process. Though it does also look at the other responsibilities of children's services. So I think that there have been some very interesting things come from the thematics, and we've been having a very close and detailed think about domestic violence, for example, as an issue, and how we see the response of the whole council and the whole partnership to that, with the social work response in terms of understanding the experience of children, the risks to children, the way that you improve the lives of children, but also hearing clearly what the impact on parents who've been victims of domestic abuse, what the impact of the child protection system is as well. Not as a way of reducing our effectiveness in safeguarding, but understanding those perspectives gives us a better idea about how we might intervene effectively. I don't know if anybody else has a contribution to make on that. Will we covered off Ofsted? Well, I hope that was interesting. So, second question. It doesn't say who's asked them, but I can see a list of names. So I'll just have to try and match the names to the questions. So one of you says, as an ex-inspector of children's services, I've come to appreciate a robust approach of councils and partnerships in regard to self-evaluation of performance and service delivery. How well developed is this in Camden? So I think I've already referred to it to a certain extent, but we think that if you don't know yourselves, if you don't really understand what impact you're having, and if you haven't done that in a fairly broad way, but also hearing really clearly what the experiences of children and parents are, then actually you've no possibility of running and developing a safe and effective service. But we listen widely to our partners, to the experiences of children and parents, and crucially to our own staff, because this is very much a shared endeavour between communities, the council and its partners, and our workforce. So there's a real sense that when you're in Camden and that you've participated in the systemic training, that's just the very beginning of being a real partner in delivering outstanding services. So I probably would say that this is well developed in terms of children's social work and safeguarding. What's interesting is seeing how that work is now influencing the wider council and indeed the wider sector. So we are influential, I think, in developing the London model, certainly in the north central sector. So let's see if there are any more questions coming in. Okay. So I'll read these out and then call people in to answer them. I think is the best way. Otherwise, you'll just hear from me, and that really would be quite tedious. Right, so Anthony, you asked how well do you think families and young people respond to the model, and how is feedback taken? And I sort of touched on this, but I think Anne's going to come and give a more detailed response. Anne, do you want to step in?
I think in some ways the families didn't necessarily realise that we were doing something different. What we've wanted to do with families is to engage them more and get better outcomes with them and with their children. We did do some involvement with young people when we designed the Camden model of social work, so they were a lot more aware of what we were doing, and we have an ongoing relationship with families through our parents reference group and through our family group conference service that helps us pick up feedback all the time. What has been very useful has been linking to this is we're now an innovation site, and that means we're doing a piece of work with children who are living in, who are subject to children in need plans, and it's called Right Balance, and you can look some of this up on the internet. But this is where we're working, building on our systemic practice, and we're getting families to take a key role in designing the plans for children. When we present to them the areas that we're concerned about, they share their concerns and they say what's going to be helpful, and then the social workers work through the plans jointly designed with the families. We're also giving families choice about which professional they work with, but to date most people are actually saying that the social work service is doing a good job by them. So I think the answer to your question is this is a continuous business of family and young people and children's feedback to our service, and we never stop asking that question.
Hello, so we had one question I think from Sarah, and she was asking about has systemic training been rolled out across the whole of the children's workforce? And this is one of the challenges I think that we first had when the Tavistock sort of did the initial training about 3 years ago, and obviously all social workers, all managers, all senior managers all had the sort of systemic training, which was a 5-day quite intense training from systemic therapists at the Tavistock. But we realised because of the nature of social work, the turnover of staff, that obviously there's new staff, there's agency staff that don't have access to that. So it's being rolled out again. But in addition to that, the systemic champions have been running their own training alongside the Tavistock training. So that's a sort of supplement, the sort of official 2-day training that the social workers get from the Tavistock. And I guess it's really important that we sort of own that training ourselves, and that sort of concept and what we're asking social workers to do is coming from us. It's not just sort of systemic family therapists that have a very different role in families' lives. And I think some of the work that we've been sort of working with the therapists is thinking about, you know, the sort of systemic concepts and the tools and techniques are really helpful, but it's about how we use those in our context. So how do we do that in a child protection conference? How we do that in a looked after children's environment, which is really different from, you know, a family approaching the Tavistock for family therapy. They might, you know, the family work with a local authority is not kind of voluntarily, so it's kind of thinking about how we use those systemic sort of therapeutic concepts with a family to get a child kind of, you know, to reduce the risks and things.
And just there's another question there. Can you tell us what Camden's systemic model of social work looks like? So as sort of Sarah and a number of people have said, it's a whole organisational approach, and I think the struggle for me in 2015 when we first started working in this way, whilst the systemic principles, you know, our social work principles deep down, the move to that model in 2015 was initially, to me, felt like this is the way we're going to do social work with families, and it is definitely still that, and it's given us some really good, useful tools and enabled social workers to feel through the provision of the group reflective supervision, which has built in a sort of more of a shared appreciation for one another's work within the teams, a shared burden of the emotional load that you hold with those cases, but also the sharing of skills within the team. So the reflective group supervision model is key to it, but it's then about how we recognise across the organisation these key principles, which is, you know, being appreciative of one another's work, being appreciative of the families who work with and the challenges they're going through, being curious and not sitting in our silos as our teams and blaming one another. It's about always asking the question as to why that's happening and trying to understand that, rather than just giving the same response we always would have given. So the teams within Camden, the social work teams, are as they were previously, but they're then set into smaller pods. So it's still individual case responsibility for the social workers, but then within the groups of social workers, 3 or 4, they will meet every 2 weeks and have their group reflective discussions to further develop their own learning, their own understanding of the case, but to acknowledge what they're bringing to it. And that's been a big bit of what the model means like to us. It's acknowledging ourselves as practitioners. And as Sarah said, that a real challenge has been, and it's worked well that it has been a journey over the last few years, because we've taken these aspects from systemic family therapy and we've made them our own as social work concepts. I suppose
That answers that.
Hello once again, it's Kurt Ferdinand with this painful experience of speaking without anyone there responding. But I'll just give you the question that I've got here is just how many caseloads do the IROs and the CPOs have at the moment? Historically, Camden used to have roughly around 350 children who were looked after, but that caseload has reduced significantly. We are now roughly around a 200 number limit in terms of our looked after children population. I have a team of IROs with 3 part-time IROs and 2 full-time IROs. The part-time IROs have roughly about 30 cases each, and then the full-time IROs have 50 plus. It will depend on which children are coming in and which ones are obviously going out. And we have a very good system in terms of allocating those cases as soon as they come in. And I pay close attention to the potential children that might be coming into the system by my links through the Children in Need team, and obviously I attend the Care Pathways panel that we hold, which has discussions about young people that are potentially coming into the system as well. So I manage that as well. I have cases myself in terms of working with a few cases that have been long term that have stayed with me. Because I think that one of the strengths in Camden is that the IRO team has been very stable for a number of years, and the IROs are a very significant person for that young person for the duration of their time in care. So we are key people in terms of holding the history and the knowledge of that young person, regardless of any changes in terms of social workers as the child remains in care. In terms of the child protection officers, they hold roughly around 50 cases, and I have 4 child protection officers, with one of them is actually part-time, and so they hold roughly about 50 cases in terms of how they actually operate as well. And again, as I said, we have a very good system in terms of allocating cases, and those CPOs are also very long-standing in terms of their work with Camden, and they will also hold on to those cases through the duration of their time on child protection plans. And we also work very closely in terms of the IROs and the CPOs in terms of cases that potentially move over to LAC and become looked after. And we have a lot of negotiation between teams in terms of whether the child protection officer continues to chair the next conference, or if it's convenient enough, the IRO allocated to the case as a looked after child will take that conference as well, and then take the child off the plan and continue with them as a looked after child. I have a second question here in terms of how the IROs ensure they act responsibly to and encourage or engage in the care council. Sorry, and again, I would say that the IROs are prominent in terms of bringing the views of the young people towards senior management. We sit located in the Crowndale Centre, So we sit with the fostering team, we sit with the adoption permanency team, we sit with the health advisors in Camden, and we have a very good system in terms of our CAMS provision as well. So we get a lot of information when we're sitting there in those teams in terms of making sure that we're hearing up-to-date information in terms of each child that's actually in care, and that helps us to continue to liaise with the social workers on the ground and their senior practitioners and team managers in terms of making sure that those plans are progressed and the needs of those children are met. I also attend the corporate parenting group as well, so I provide an annual report at the end of the year, giving an update in terms of how we're doing in terms of the service. And as I said earlier on, I'm very keen on in terms of bringing up themes for the local authority in terms of what's happening on the ground for some of the young people, some of the changes that they're feeling, particularly around child sexual exploitation and youth offending, because we also sit within the teams with the youth offending team. They also sit in our same building as well, so we keep a lot of dialogue there. So I also make sure that that information is presented within my IRO annual report, and so it's discussed within the council, and Martin and Anne are very good in terms of picking up on some of those themes and bringing them to the wider network in terms of how we can improve our practice as we go forward. All right.
So I've been just asked to come over and answer the question, how do you ensure the IRO voice is heard within court proceedings? And I think we're very closely liaising with CAFCAS, and the manager of the local CAFCAS area came to our IRO team meeting not last month, the month before, and the team of the local CAFCAS office are actually coming to meet with us on Wednesday. There you go. So we're working very closely with our colleagues in CAFCAS. We are very keen to be involved in any legal proceedings going on. We feel like we, as Kurt said, have a really good relationships with our young people. And as Kurt said, they're often long-standing relationships. Obviously, we don't want them to be too long-standing because we want the children to move on to permanency as soon as possible. But that's something that we see as a key part of our role, and are happy to contribute to court proceedings when required.
Hello, I've had a question from Trish. She said, Camden is a good authority. What areas of social work practice require focused attention currently? I think, like many authorities, we are working hard to think how we can respond appropriately to the needs of vulnerable adolescents. And that has been an area for social work practice that I think in all the feedback we've had is one of the hardest. And working particularly with police, youth offending teams, looking at child sexual exploitation and other areas of vulnerability. This is an area that has taken up a lot of social work time, and many people feel our traditional processes are not fit for purpose. In Camden, we've had a youth task force that has looked at this area, and social work has contributed to that discussion. And from that work, we are looking at developing a different way of working with young people who are experiencing high risk of harm through their own risky behaviour, but seeing them as vulnerable young people who are both at times victims and perpetrators. As part of our Partners in Practice work, we're developing a trial of work carried out by both social workers and youth offending teams to see if we can look at a smarter, more effective and much more young person focused way of working. So if you ask me what our big challenge is for practice, I think that is one. I've also been asked to answer another question, which was from Nicola, asking about clinical support available to social workers in their work with families. In Camden, we're really well blessed because we have very, very good child and adolescent mental health facilities. And so all our services have clinicians who work with them to deliver clinical services to our vulnerable young people. In addition, the Camden model of social work provides mentoring support to the senior practitioners who are leading the social work reflective discussions in the hubs. and we have a facility that coaches and develops people so that they receive ongoing clinical support in the way that they're operating within the reflective conversations. But at the heart of the Camden model is that social work is actually the lead profession in the work we're doing, and that's why we call it the Camden model of social work. We use the other disciplines to help us do the work, but we're proud of being social workers, and we think social workers, through their key relationship with children, young people and families and the network, can deliver a lot of significant change for families.
So there have been a number of questions actually in that area of kind of vulnerable adolescence, and some of the key kind of safeguarding themes: child sexual exploitation, radicalisation, female genital mutilation, etc. So, and we've taken very much an approach which has looked not at these as entirely separate issues, though of course each of them has aspects which need to be responded to in a very specific way, but also to think about how they align so that we are better able to respond, as Anne was describing, particularly in the area of adolescence, in a way which, rather than categorising young people by the thing we think that they're most at risk at, actually thinking about how they live their lives and how we engage with them in a way which promotes their safety and protects them from exploitation and harm. And as many of you will know, that's a real challenge for us nationally, but we've got, I think, a really strong track record of building that partnership. And there was another question. I'm sorry, I don't know who asked this question, but it was a useful one, which is, how we supported the wider system change across the partnership to develop relationship-based interventions and preventative approaches. And this is very much a feature of Camden. We have a program called the Resilient Families Program, which is a way of shifting the centre of gravity of the whole partnership's efforts towards prevention and early intervention, and developing models of practice which are relational and systemic. And though social work is a very particular discipline and has a particular, the Camden model of social work really sits at the heart of that. Similar approaches are taken in our early help services when we are working with other agencies and other professionals, and in particular when we're doing our work with schools. There's a very strong partnership with schools, and we have practitioners, and indeed there are CAMS practitioners and police officers based in schools as well. So it's very much and each of the disciplines and each of the agencies have participated in that sort of training, though not to the depth that each of the social workers has. But it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Can excellent social work flourish as an island on its own, or does it have to sit in a wider approach, which is where we have a common understanding of the needs of a population? We're really familiar with the evidence of what works. We're able to engage with families and children and communities in a way which is relevant to them, rather than simply ticking all the boxes and missing the point. So that's very much our approach. I hope that this evening, hearing from some colleagues, I have to say, none of us are particularly used to speaking directly to a camera and seeing nobody out there. We know we're there. But I hope you found that interesting, stimulating. It's if you thought this looks like the sort of place where I really might be interested in moving for the next stage of my career, I know that you can. You will have already had information about how to take your application further, and we hope that the things that you've heard this evening will also resonate with you over the next day or so, and you'll mull them over and think about whether or not there is, first of all, a role for you here in Camden, but secondly, whether or not it's helped you think about your practice and your current approaches, and whether or not, as part of that wider debate about what excellent practice looks like, that you're able to participate in that too. It's a real pleasure to be able to host these webinars, and I'm just going to check that we are clear about the way in which people make the next stage of their application. So that's just before I let you go, I just wanted to make sure that you've got that information. Thank you very much for your participation and some really interesting questions. And we will reflect on the questions as well, actually, because there's always something to learn in these circumstances. Thanks very much. Good night.